Today I want to talk with you about the topic of hell, or what is more accurately and scripturally, the Lake of Burning Sulfur. But the sermons always refer to it as hell, where the unbelievers end up in the afterlife, those whose names are not written in the book of life, the Lamb's book of life. This is a very hard one to talk about. This is not an easy topic to talk about. But one thing that the Lord revealed to me about it is that those who end up there are going to want to commit suicide every single day. Every single moment they're there, they're going to want to commit suicide, but they have no way of doing it. But they're going to want to every moment. Now you might ask, Ron, where do you get this from? Well, we're going to look into the scriptures here. We're going to find out that there, at the end times, men will actually be calling for the rocks and the mountains to come down on them because of the fear of the presence of the Lord. And if men desire suicide when they're in their bodies and alive on earth, how much more when they're cast into the lake of burning sulfur, where they will be tormented day and night by angels. You say, angels? Angels? What? Yeah. We're going to look at the revelation of Peter, which was in the canon. It was part of the scriptures read among all the churches until the Catholic hierarchy rose up and took charge of the canon. Now, you rarely hear me say anything negative about the Catholic Church, but in this case, I do, which is the canon. What is the canon? The canon of Scripture. That means which books are in the Bible. Now, I don't disagree that the books that are in the Bible should be in the Bible. They should be in the Bible. But there are some that were excluded at the council that they made for the canon. The councils that they made for the canon. This is long before the Protestant Reformation was even a dream, was even an idea. This is in the early times of, 300 AD. So, but the revelation of Peter was one of them, and it only has a couple surviving chapters. And it is the most graphic description of the punishment of those in the afterlife whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life. It is shocking. When I get to read it, when I start to read it, I will go ahead and give a warning before I start reading it. So right now, let's just go ahead and look at the scriptures that are in the Bible itself, and we'll see what it has to say about this topic. We start off with Revelation 6. Let me pull it up so I can see it. Revelation 6, starting in verse 12, we're going to go through 17. And it says, "And I beheld when he opened the sixth signet." It says seal, but it literally means signet. It's not a seal that prevents you from opening it. It's a seal that warns you not to open it because of the power and authority of the person whose signet made this. It is a kind of seal, but it's a seal that's made with a signet, like a signet ring and wax. "And lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind." You got the picture of this fig tree who's got figs on it, but they're not ripe yet. They're not ready to fall. But when a wind shakes it, they fall. Okay? And so the same is true of the stars in heaven, that at a time where it's not time for those stars to fall, they're shaken and fall to earth. Verse 14, "And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together." You got the scroll was in two parts, and it's rolled apart like this. You got the rollers here where it unrolls, right? And you can read in between. And when it's rolled together, you can no longer see what's there. So it's saying that heaven itself, now remember in Greek there are three heavens. There's the heaven where the birds fly, then there's a heaven where the stars are, then there's heaven where God and the angels are. So which heaven is rolled up? Well, probably the place where the stars are, because it just mentioned the stars being shaken and falling to earth. And the heaven departed as a scroll, because you got the stars falling to earth, right? Then the heaven departs as a scroll when it's rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Imagine seeing the mountains suddenly moving, or the islands moving. Verse 15, and the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, the military leaders, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. You think the lamb is just a little innocent creature, and that word lamb means lambkin. It's like little lamb. Fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. The wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? So here are every man who is any man crying for suicide, crying to be killed. They're so terrified of the wrath of God that they're begging to be killed. And this is why, while they are still on earth and alive in their bodies. Can you imagine how much worse it's going to be once that wrath grabs hold of you and puts you into that lake of burning sulfur, where the devil was cast and the smoke of his torment rises forever and ever. And you're there too, being punished. It's not the kind of punishment now like our bodies get used to pain and it doesn't feel painful after a while. It may even feel good after a while. So we pervert it. But those senses, that connection between our sensations and our brain, are going to be renewed every day. So every day we're going to be renewed so that we feel the pain all over again. It's fresh. It never releases. Just like it says, and their worm never dies. Let's go to the next scripture. Here we are in Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse 10. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Forever and ever, day and night, they will be tormented. The devil, the beast, and the false prophet, the evil trinity. And I saw a great white throne. Great meaning big. And I saw a big white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. So that's what was happening in the other chapter that we were reading, because heaven and earth were fleeing away. The mountains and the islands moved away, and the stars fell out of the sky, and even the sky rolled up and disappeared. Verse 12, and I saw the dead, small and great, everyone, stand before God. And the books were opened. Books. And the books were opened. These are the books of the deeds of everyone who's ever lived. And the books were opened. And I think it's Proverbs 13 where it talks about the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, to see good and evil. Everywhere. and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. So these books are a record of their works, of our works, from our life, of what we've done. Verse 13, and the sea gave up the dead which were in it, everyone who died at sea. The sea gave up the dead which were in it. And death and hell, these words are very difficult because they're mistranslated often, but it means that the grave, that's death, and the grave and Hades, which is hell, delivered up the dead which were in them. So those who were in the grave and those who were actually cast into hell because they were so wicked. Delivered up the dead which were in them. So if you go to hell, you're not going to stay there. You're going to come up and be judged, but then you're going to go into the lake of burning sulfur, which is even worse. That's irrevocable. That never can be taken away. And they were judged, every man according to their works. They weren't judged based on what they believed. What they believed is what made them able to do their works that were good or that were evil in God's eyes. Because we can do something that's good in man's eyes, but is not good in God's eyes. So we have to be careful. We have to be able to do what's right in God's eyes, because He is the one who's going to judge us, not man. And they were judged every man according to their works, their deeds, what they did. And death and hell, right, the grave and Hades, were cast into the lake of fire. So those places where people were kept were also cast into the lake of fire. It says this is the second death. There are two deaths. There's the first death, bodily death, and the second death, which is this one. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. If your name is not written in the book of life, you will be cast into the lake of fire. Now let's go to our next passage. So now we're going to look in Isaiah chapter 2, starting in verse 10, and I'm reading from the Apostles' Bible. And as you know, if you've watched my other videos where I read from the Old Testament, I don't use the King James in the Old Testament. I'll use it in the New Testament most of the time. Sometimes green's literal if the King James is too weird. And but if I've got the rooted word done, I'll use that, whether it's New or Old Testament, because that's our own my own translation. The Apostles' Bible is a translation from the Septuagint, which is also what I use to translate the Old Testament. So, although it's not a perfect translation, it's not as good as ours. I'm not saying ours is perfect, but it is as accurate as I've seen. And but we use the Apostles' Bible if we don't have it translated into the rooted word. So here we are in Isaiah 2, verse 10. But we're going to back up just a couple of verses. Let's see, back to verse 8 for sure. Let's see. Here we go. We can start in verse 6. For he has forsaken his people, the house of Israel, because their land is filled, as at the beginning, with divinations, as the land of the Philistines, and many strange children were born to them. So the situation is that they are no better than the nations around them, or than they were before they knew God. That they are into divinations. Okay? So let me check what that word is, because it's very important. So the word is kledonisme. It's a unique word that appears in the Septuagint. And it comes from the word that means omen or sign. Okay, so it's like observing an omen or a sign. Because their land is filled as at the beginning with observing omens and signs, as the land of the Philistines still is. That's what it means. And many strange children were born to them. Strange meaning foreign. Okay, not strange like bizarre. Verse 7, for their land is filled with silver and gold, and there was no number of their treasures. too many to count. Their land also is filled with horses, and there was no number of chariots. And the land is filled with abominations, even the works of their hands. Even the works of their hands are abominations to God. And they have worshipped the works which their fingers made. So obviously the works of their hands is referring to idols. They're making idols with their hands, which are abominations to God. If you read the Old Testament, you know that. In the Pentateuch especially. So one of the things that's named as an abomination is idolatry. Idols are an abomination to God. If you have something that you treat as an idol, it is an abomination to God. These people were actually making abominations with their hands. They would worship things that they themselves made. They made the things and worshipped it as if it had made them. How perverse is that? Verse 9. And the mean man bowed down to the thing he made. And the great man was humbled, not humbled by God, humbled by the idol. And I will not pardon them. Now therefore enter into the rocks and hide yourselves in the earth for fear of the Lord, and by reason of the glory of his might. And by reason of the glory of his might. You need a reason? The reason is the glory of his might. The glory means to reveal the reputation of. The true reputation of. Not just reputation like what people think of you, but the true reputation, what you are worthy of. When he shall arise to strike mightily the earth. To strike really strong the earth with all his might. All his power. Verse 11, for the eyes of the Lord are high, but man is low. And the haughtiness of men shall be brought low, that pride. And the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. In that day, the only one who will still be exalted is the Lord. He will not stand for anyone else being exalted at that point. Everyone will be laid low. Let's go to the next verse. Now we're in Hosea chapter 10, verse 8, starting in verse 8. And the altars of On, that's a place, the sins of Israel shall be taken away. Thorns and thistles shall come up on their altars. And they shall say, not the altars, but Israel, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. Not cover us like protect us, but fall on us. From the time the hills existed, Israel has sinned. There they stood. War waged against the children of iniquity. Iniquity means lawlessness. So there they stood, war waged against the children of lawlessness to chastise them. The nations shall be gathered against them when they are chastened for their two sins. Ephraim is a heifer taught to love victory, but I will come upon the fairest part of her neck, the weakest part of her neck, the softest part. I will mount Ephraim, I will pass over Judah in silence. Jacob shall prevail against him. Sow to yourselves for righteousness. Very important here. Sow to yourselves for righteousness. Gather in for the fruit of life. If you do not sow for yourselves righteousness, you will not gather in any fruit of life. Light for yourselves the light of knowledge. Seek the Lord till the fruits of righteousness come upon you. Seek the Lord till the fruits of righteousness come upon you, till you're able to do what's right, and the fruit of that comes, that fruit of life. The fruits of righteousness, not meaning that the righteousness is the fruits. The fruits come out of the righteousness, just like it just said in the first half of the verse. Sow to yourselves for righteousness, gather in for the fruit of life. Okay? Life is the fruit that comes out of righteousness. And if you read Proverbs, that's a consistent theme there. Seek the Lord till the fruits of righteousness come upon you. Life. For you have passed over ungodliness in silence and reaped the sins of it. You ignored irreverence. That's what ungodliness means. Irreverence. You have passed over irreverence in silence. There has been irreverence in your life, and you have ignored that you've actually behaved that way. You haven't said a word to the Lord. You have not apologized to him. And reaped the sins of it, because the sins come out of irreverence. You want to stop sinning? Stop being irreverent. We talk about that all the time. Stop sinning. Stop sinning. Almost every video I tell you, stop sinning. And yet if you keep being irreverent, even in small ways or in occasional ways, Christian humor, for example, Christian jokes. There's no such thing as a Christian joke. Jokes are irreverence. They're designed by nature to be irreverent of something. And the Christian should not be irreverent of anything. Even celestial beings, even fallen celestial beings like the devil. You should not be irreverent. You should not be irreverent of these things. You don't know what they are. You don't know what God thinks about them. We have limited knowledge exposed to us in the scriptures. Do not be irreverent, because it breeds sin. You have eaten false fruit, for you have trusted in your sins in the abundance of your power. Wow. Out of your irreverence, you combine that with your power, and you keep growing your power, and you rely on your power, and that reliance on your power, together with your irreverence of God, yields this fruit of sin. It's a false fruit, and you're eating it. Imagine what it's doing to your stomach. Imagine it racing through your bloodstream. This false fruit of sin. Imagine what it's building in your muscles and your bones, in your brain tissue. Let's look at another verse. Now we're in the New Testament in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 23, starting at verse 26. This is about Jesus being led to the cross. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, the Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus, following him after. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, and he's saying this to the women, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming. Now he's prophesying. For behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck. Paps are the breasts. So blessed is the woman who never gives birth to a child, and blessed are the breasts that never are sucked by a baby, an infant. Verse 30, Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? For if they do these things that they're doing to Jesus at this moment in a green tree, when the tree is green and alive, and they can eat from it and live and be happy, what shall be done when the tree is dry? What kind of wickedness will they do when the tree is dry? Which is why they shall say to the mountains, fall upon us, and to the hills, cover us. And if they feel that way, that they want to die when they're alive, how much more severely are you going to want to die every moment that you're being tormented in that lake of burning sulfur when your name is not found written in the Lamb's book of life, whether you call yourself a Christian or you don't? If your name is not written in the Lamb's book of life, you will be cast into the lake of burning sulfur. And that's determined after they judge you based on the works of your life. And remember, Jesus said that too in his last teaching in Matthew before he went to the cross, and the sheep and the goats. He judged them based on what they did and called them righteous when they did what was good, and called them wicked when they didn't do what was right. And he assigned them to their eternal punishment or eternal reward of life. Right there. And here's the Apocalypse of Peter. I'm just going to read part of it, where it describes some of the torments. So if you're sensitive to such things, because I warn you, this is very graphic, but if you're sensitive to such things, then, go ahead and pause or fast forward or whatever. So here it is. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it up so you can read along with me. I've got it in a document. So here it is. And this is verse 21 of this chapter, whatever chapter it is. And I saw also another place. Remember, this is Peter who wrote this. And this was used in the church before the Apocalypse of John was even accepted. And the Apocalypse of John did not replace the Apocalypse of Peter. They were both also equally used after the Apocalypse of John was added. So 21, and I saw also another place over against the one very squalid, and it was a place of punishment. And they that were punished, and the angels that punished them, had their raiment dark. Raiment's like clothing, according to the air of the place, the atmosphere. And some there were there hanging by their tongues. Hanging by their tongues. And these were they that blasphemed the way of righteousness. That's not only the people who didn't do righteousness. It's those who blasphemed the way of righteousness. So those were even Christians who try to distort righteousness into something else to keep people from doing what's right. And under them was laid fire, flaming and tormenting them. So not only were they hanging by their tongues, but they had a fire under them, flaming and tormenting them. And there was a great lake full of flaming mire, wherein were certain men that turned away from righteousness, and angels, tormentors, were set over them. And there were also others, women, hanged by their hair above the mire, which boiled up, and these were they that adorned themselves for adultery. They dressed for adultery. And the men that were joined with them in the defilement of adultery were hanging by their feet, and had their heads hidden in the mire. Remember, the mire is on fire. This kind of mud, this boiling mud, and their heads were hidden inside of it. And they said, we believed not that we should come unto this place. They didn't believe that they should be there. They didn't believe that they should be there. Those are the men. And I saw the murderers and them that were consenting to them cast into a straight place full of evil, creeping things, and smitten by those beasts, and so turning themselves about in that torment, like trying to get them off of them. And upon them were set worms, like clouds of darkness. And the souls of them that were murdered stood and looked upon the torment of those murderers, and said, O God, righteous is thy judgment. So here are those who are murdered, who are also present there in the lake of burning sulfur, watching their murderers be tormented. Verse 26, and hard by that place, meaning very close by, I saw another straight place, like narrow, wherein the discharge and the stench of them that were in torment ran down. So whatever was the liquid that was coming out of them, and the smell of it ran down. That was from their torment. And there was, as it were, a lake there. So a lake of their stench and their discharge. And there sat women up to their necks in that liquor, in that kind of liquid. And over against them, many children which were born out of due time sat crying. And from them went forth rays of fire and smote the women in the eyes. And these were they that conceived out of wedlock and caused abortion. It's the only place in the Bible where abortion is directly mentioned. This is the Apocalypse of Peter. It was used in the beginning in the church. It wasn't until about the 200s or maybe even 300 where they decided in the canon to take it out. And my guess is that it was just too difficult to read out loud. It was too graphic to read out loud in church, so they didn't read it out loud in church. And so by then they thought, well, it's not being read in church, so it's not being used. So it's not a good reason. So, but look at this image. These women sat up to their necks in the discharge, all right, in the discharge of the stench of them that were in torment. So all the stench and the discharge of those who were being tormented was running down into a lake. These women were sitting there up to their necks in it. And opposite them were many, many children which were born. They were sitting there crying. They had been born out of time. They were born by women who were not married and then were aborted. And the eyes of these babies were shooting out rays of fire that were burning the women in the eyes. Very graphic. Verse 27, and other men and women were being burned up in their middle and cast down in a dark place and scourged by evil spirits, like whipped and beaten by evil spirits, and having their entrails, their insides, devoured by worms that rested not. They never rest. The worms never rest, are always eating. And these were they that had persecuted the righteous and delivered them up, betrayed them. And near to them, again, were women and men gnawing their lips and in torment, and having iron heated in the fire set against their eyes. So, branding their eyes with hot iron. And they're biting their lips in torment. They're like chewing down on their lips in torment. And these were they that did blaspheme and speak evil of the way of righteousness. And over against these were yet others, men and women, gnawing their tongues and having flaming fire in their mouths. And these were the false witnesses. They had fire inside their mouths, burning up their mouths. These were the false witnesses. We're almost done here. Almost done. Verse 30, and in another place were gravel stones sharper than swords or any spit, heated with fire, and men and women clad in filthy rags rolled upon them in torment. And these were they that were rich and trusted in their riches, and had no pity upon orphans and widows, but neglected the commandments of God. Verse 31, and in another great lake full of foul matters, pus, and blood, and boiling mire, stood men and women up to their knees, and these were they that lent money and demanded usury upon usury, meaning charging interest on the interest. They would lend money, they charge interest, but usury is charging interest on the interest. So if they couldn't pay the interest, they would add it to the principal and then charge interest on the whole thing again. And so they kept charging interest on the part that was the interest. This is illegal in the Bible. And yet our banks do it. So all of them will end up in this place right here, with the pus and the blood of the boiling mire up to their knees in it. And other men and women, being cast down from a great rock, a precipice, fell to the bottom, and again were driven by them that were set over them to go up upon the rock, and thence were cast down to the bottom, and had no rest from this torment. These were they that did defile their bodies, behaving as women, and the women that were with them were they that lay with one another as a man with a woman. So, the men who behaved like women and the women who were lesbians. Verse 33, and beside that rock was a place full of much fire, and there stood men which with their own hands had made images for themselves instead of God. And beside them other men and women having rods of fire and smiting one another and never resting from this manner of torment. There's the idolatry, the idolaters. They had rods of fire and they were striking each other with these. And yet others near unto them, men and women, burning and turning themselves about and roasted as in a pan. And these were they that forsook the way of God. They abandoned the way of God, the way of salvation. I told you, it's graphic. It's very specific. Very specific. It's not this general stuff you hear in church. This is extremely specific. So now, you'll understand why I said that if you end up in this place, in any one of those situations, any one of them, you're going to be begging to be killed every moment. Please kill me and end this. Put me out of my misery. You're going to desire suicide more than those people who are alive on the earth, calling the mountains to fall upon them and the rocks to cover them. Do you really want to end up in that place? Because once you're there, it can't be undone. That's why they will be begging to be finally killed, because it never ends. Think about it, because this life does end. It's not really that long. And the older you get, the faster it goes. Because the more that you're familiar with everything around you and the less you really notice things, and the faster and faster it goes, it'll be over. It will be over. You have to be mindful right now. You have to take hold with your mind in the situation that you're in and do what is right and stop sinning. May the Lord bless you as you seek Him with all your heart. Remember to subscribe down below and like the video and share it on your Facebook and other social media. And then make a comment, whether a question or a comment. We read all of them, and we try to respond to all. Get on over to our website, The Rooted Word, and start reading the translation and also the articles that we've posted. It's at therootedword.com, therootedword.com. And may the Lord bless you as you seek Him with all your heart.